That old fishing rod leaning in the corner behind your barn door, the one with cobwebs strung between the guides and the cork handle gone black and crumbly. The one that goes on the burn pile the day the family finally cleans the place out. I sold one that looked worse than that for $3,800, and the man who owned it had already carried it out to the fire ring twice and changed his mind twice. Today we're going through 10 fishing rods sitting in barns and closets and rafters all across this country right now that are worth a great deal more than anybody ever bothered to tell the people who own them. And I'll say it up front, most of them look like nothing at all. That is the entire problem, and it is the reason they end up in the fire. Before we get rolling, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Ohio, Georgia, New Zealand, doesn't matter to me. I read every single one, and I answer them too. And hang on through number 8, because that's the one where I cost myself money with my own 2 hands, and I've never forgotten it. Name's Otis Granger. I'm 64 years old, and I've spent 40 years picking barns, estate auctions, and Saturday morning farm sales all through the Midwest. Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, a fair piece of Missouri. When I started, I did not know a thing, and there was no book. I was 24 and green as spring grass, so I wrote the one I wanted, the Barn Find Bible. Code in the top right corner of your screen, top comment if you are on the phone, or barnfindbible.com. All right, back to it. I've come down out of more haylofts than I can count and hauled home a lot more junk than treasure, and I'll be honest with you about that part. But somewhere in there I learned how to read the things people throw away, what the stamps mean, what the wearer tells you. And I got tired of watching decent families load real money onto a trailer at scrap prices because nobody ever sat down and walked them through it. Rods I know from both ends, the buying and the using, because I've had a line in the water on about every river between here and the Missouri, and I've owned a few of the rods we're about to get into. So that's all this is here, you and me over a tailgate. Subscribe if this is useful. I have watched too many families haul off more than the whole load paid them. One fellow took $60 for a whole trailer. I cannot be everywhere. So I wrote it down, Barn Find Bible, code in the top right corner, top comment on your phone, or barnfindbible.com. All right, back to it. Now let me walk something back before we go a step further, because I'd rather you trust me than like me. Most old fishing rods in most barns are $10 to $40 rods. That's the honest middle of this market. And I'll go further. A great many of them are worth nothing at all, and I mean nothing, not on account of the maker, but because they're broken. A snapped tip. A rod leaned in a damp corner until the glue let go. That is firewood. I've sorted racks of 30 rods in a garage and found 29 that weren't worth the gas to get there. So if you go look tonight and every rod you own is a $40 rod, that is the normal outcome. Here's what makes rods different from anything else in your barn. With a rod, nearly all the value sits in 2 questions. Who built it, and is it still all there? A split cane rod is 6 thin strips of bamboo glued into a hexagon, wrapped in silk and sealed under varnish, and it spent 80 years either shut in an aluminum tube in a closet or leaned in a barn corner where the damp got at it. So condition swings wilder here than anywhere. And the biggest thing folks get wrong, the one that costs real money in both directions, is assuming old bamboo automatically means valuable. It does not. Most old bamboo is production cane, turned out by the thousand for hardware stores. The named makers are a different animal. The difference between a $50 rod and a $5,000 rod is a name written in ink on the shaft just above the grip, and it takes about 10 seconds to read it. And age is not the driver you think. Length and line weight are. A short light rod, 7 feet or 7.5, taking a 4 or 5 weight line is what people actually want to fish today, and it brings 3 or 4 times what a 9-foot heavy stick off the same bench brings. All right, number 10. Number 10 is the white fiberglass rod, and it's here to set an honest floor under this whole list. The Shakespeare Wonder Rod, chalky white with the spiral wrap, the yellow eagle claw featherlight, the Garcia Conilon, made by the millions from the 50s into the 70s, and every one is the rod some family is certain must be the treasure. It isn't. A common glass rod is a $10 to $30 rod on a good day. Check three things anyway. The wraps and guides, because clean originals at least sell to a fisherman. The model on the blank, because there are two exceptions worth knowing. Early Fenwick fly rods, the FF series, move at 75 to 200, and a Rust Peak, built by hand out in Pasadena, is genuinely four figures. Third, the cork, which tells you how it was stored. A widow near Manitowoc, Wisconsin, set 6 glass rods on her kitchen table as the good ones. All 6 came to $90. The money that day was one dented tube behind the water heater, and it paid her more than the whole garage. Number 9. Number 9 is the steel rod, especially the telescoping kind that collapses into itself like a radio antenna. Bristol Steel Rod Company out of Bristol, Connecticut, built most of what you'll run across, and Union Hardware and True Temper built the rest. From about 1920 into the 50s, these were the working man's rod, and they are near indestructible. Nothing that survived by the hundreds of thousands is scarce. A Bristol telescoping rod is a $15 to $35 item, and a rusted one with a seized section is worth nothing at all. I wrote a line in my notes in '88 I have never had to change. People confuse heavy with valuable. 3 checks. Does it telescope free? Is the reel seat original? And the early Bristol fly rods with nickel silver fittings, which get you $60 or $80, and that is the ceiling. I gave $11 for a box lot at a swap meet in Nebraska City, mostly for the creel in the bottom. 9 steel rods came with it. I handed 8 to a kid at the next sale. Number 8 is the mass market bamboo rod, the hardware store and department store cane, and it fools more people than anything on this list. Sears sold them as J.C. Higgins. Montgomery Ward sold them as Hawthorne. Every one was built by somebody else and stamped with the store's name. They are real split bamboo. And to a family opening a closet, they look identical to a rod worth $5,000. They are not. A store brand cane rod runs $25 to $100, and $100 means complete with tube, bag, and both tips. Look for a store name where a maker's name ought to be. Count your tips because these came with 2 and almost nobody has both. And check the ferrules where sections join, because these use cheap drawn tubing that splits. Now here's where I cost myself money. At a sale in Pella, Iowa, a Higgins came apart stubborn, and I pulled and twisted at once. Snapped the tip 4 inches down, $60 rod to a $15 rod in 1 second. Pull straight and warm the ferrule in your hands first. Number 7 is Montague, the production tier. Montague City Rod Company of Montague City, Massachusetts was the biggest bamboo rod builder this country ever had, turning out hundreds of thousands under names like Rapidan, Manitou, Red Wing, and Sunbeam. Horrocks Ibbotson of Utica, New York was the other giant, stamped H and I. But scarcity is the whole game, and there is none here. A typical Montague is a $50 to $150 rod. The better models, complete with tube, bag, and 2 good tips, might reach $300. That is the top of this tier, and I say it because I see Montagues listed at $1,200 every week, and those listings never sell. I wrote in '94 that the Montague ceiling was $300, and 30 years on it still is. Read the butt cap and the shaft above the grip for a model name. Lay both tips together, and hunt for a wrap color that doesn't match its neighbors, because that means somebody rebuilt it. I gave $200 for a full rod rack outside Sullivan, Illinois, wanting one particular rod in it. 4 Montagues hung in that rack. All 4 together brought me $310. Number 6 is Hedden, and I need to be clear here. because most folks hear that name and picture painted wooden baits. Different object entirely. The Hedden shop in Dowagiac, Michigan built split bamboo fly rods and numbered their models instead of naming them. The 17 Black Beauty. And at the top, the 50 Deluxe President. This is the first tier where 4 figures becomes possible, and I mean possible. Most Hedden bamboo runs $150 to $500. A clean Black Beauty in a short length, tube and sock with it, both tips straight, gets $700 to $1,200. A Deluxe President in that shape can pass $2,000. Those numbers assume everything is right, and on most of them, something isn't. The tell is stamped into the cane just forward of the grip, model number and length. My notes carry a 17 at $860 out of a sale I wrote down in 2003. At an estate in Fort Madison, Iowa, the family had the rods loaded in a pickup for the dump. Bottom of the pile, a 17, 7.5 feet, in its tube, both tips perfect. $740. They had the truckload priced at $20. Number 5 is South Bend and Shakespeare bamboo. Your ordinary South Bend cane rod, the 246, the 323, is a $75 to $250 rod, and a standard Shakespeare sits right with it. But South Bend bought the Cross Rod Company out of Lynn, Massachusetts in the 30s, and the cross rods, the double-built ones with a second layer of cane laminated inside the walls, are a different animal. Those run $400 to $1,200. Read the shaft above the grip for the word cross. Sight down the rod for a permanent bend, because a bent one drops by half. There's a page in my book on South Bend model numbers I go back to constantly because they reuse numbers across decades and I still get them turned around. Down at Rice Lake, Wisconsin, a fella had 4 cane rods bundled by a burn barrel, and the tubes were dented so he'd written them off. I asked him to hold off 10 minutes. The 4th one out of that bundle was a cross double built, 8 feet, and it paid him $960 for 10 minutes of patience. Number 4 is Orvis, out of Manchester, Vermont, and in 1946 they did something nobody else was doing at scale. Instead of varnishing the outside, they soaked the whole rod in Bakelite resin under pressure so it went clear through the bamboo. Impregnated, they called it. It locked the moisture out, so an Orvis that sat 50 years in a damp barn is often still straight when everything else on that rack has gone soft. The finish gives it away, a dull semi-gloss instead of a shine, with wraps gone translucent amber. The models are the Battenkill, the Superfine, and at the top, the West Jordan. A standard Battenkill runs $500 to $1,200. A West Jordan Complete brings $2,000 to $3,500, and length matters more here than anywhere. A 7'4" weight will double a 9-footer from the same year every time. I have that band in my own notes, and I checked it against 3 sales last spring before I'd say it out loud. I bought one for $30 in a tackle box lot near Alexandria, Minnesota. That's the one I kept, 7.5 feet. It rides in my truck and will not be sold in my lifetime. Number 3 is Winston and Powell. The R.L. Winston Rod Company started in San Francisco, where Lou Stoner patented a way of building a bamboo rod hollow with flutes milled inside the strips so it kept its power and lost weight. E.C. Powell, up in Marysville, California, was doing his own semi-hollow build. A Winston bamboo rod runs $1,500 to $4,000, and Powell sits in that same band. A Stoner-era fluted hollow build in a short length can reach $5,000 or $6,000. The tells are the signature and serial on the shaft, and on a Powell, a butt section that feels far too light for its diameter the second you pick it up. There's a line in my book about that lightness that I underlined because it's the quickest way to sort a Powell out of a crowded rack in bad light. I got beat clean to one at an estate sale in Sturgis, Michigan. A dealer was through the door 40 minutes ahead of me and had it under his arm before I got to the basement. He paid $180 and sold it for $2,200, and he was decent enough to tell me so. Number 2 is Payne and Leonard. the two names that built the American split cane rod. H.L. Leonard of Central Valley, New York, is the father of the whole business. The Leonard factory burned in 1964 and took the tooling with it, so collectors draw a hard line at that year. E.F. Payne was down at Highland Mills, and Jim Payne is reckoned the finest production bamboo builder who ever lived. A Payne runs $3,000 to $6,000 in the short light lengths people want. Leonard's vary more, $800 to $4,000 for most, and a pre-fire one in a 7-foot 4-weight can bring $6,000 or $8,000. My notes put a standard post-fire Leonard at $900 to $1,600. Now, I passed on a Payne once at an auction in Warrensburg, Missouri. It had a hairline in the tip I read as a crack. It wasn't. It was a varnished check, a line in the finish that means almost nothing. I let it go at $480 and watched it resell inside a year for $4,200. That is why I carry a loop. And number one is Everett Garrison, Pinky Gillum, and the master makers at the top. And I want to be honest because you're almost certainly not going to find one. Garrison was an engineer out of Yonkers, New York, who built maybe 700 rods in his life, every one calculated on paper first, and he wrote the book every hand builder since has learned from. Harold Gillum, Pinky to everybody, worked out of Connecticut in numbers so small collectors track his rods one at a time. Rods like these have crossed the block at Lang's, the big tackle auction house, at $10,000 and $30, and again at $16,400. And the record for the category is pushing 20,000. Fewer than 1,000 of these exist. They were expensive new, bought by men who knew what they had, and they lived in tubes and closets, not leaned in barns. This is a once-in-a-lifetime find, and I have never made it. Closest I came was a preview in Kendallville, Indiana, where a consignor brought a signed Garrison in its tube, and I held it 2 minutes before the catalog closed. Lightest 8-foot rod I have ever handled. It brought $9,000, and I went home with a box of reels. Now here's the other half of the truth. Condition decides everything on a rod. The tip section is the big one. It's the thinnest part and by far the most commonly lost piece. So if a rod came with 2 tips and you have one, you've lost 1/3 of the value. If both are gone, you have a wall decoration. Lay both tips side by side with the ferrule ends dead even and look at the tops. If one comes up short, it's been rebuilt or it came off another rod. Then run your eye down the silk wraps for a color that doesn't match, because a rewrap section is a rebuilt one. Next, delamination. Sight down each flat of the hexagon for a fine dark line where the glue has let go and the strips are separating. That one is terminal. Then a set, a permanent bend that won't roll out on a tabletop. A slight one is forgivable. A real one halves the price. Then the cork, because a shrunken, crumbling grip drops a rod a tear. And do not throw out the tube and the cloth sock, because on a good rod, those are 1/3 of the money. That third has been in my notes since '96. And this one hurts to watch. Never varnish it, never refinish it, never clean the wraps up. A refinished rod loses most of its value to a collector on the spot. I've watched a man turn a $2,000 rod into a $400 rod over a weekend with a can and a brush and the best intentions in the world. And here's what bothers me about all of it. Nobody tells you any of this. There's a whole quiet business built on you not knowing. The fellow who shows up at the estate sale at 6 in the morning and offers $100 cash for the entire rod rack. The clean-out crew that hauls the garage for free and keeps whatever they like. They aren't lucky. They're counting on the fact that nobody ever taught you to read the shaft above the grip. That isn't a crime. It's information, and information is only worth something while it's uneven. So even it up. Before that trailer backs out of your driveway, spend 20 minutes with a rag and a flashlight. Because that's the whole point of this list. Value hides in plain sight, not behind glass in a museum, not in some exotic thing you've never heard of, but in the ordinary, the rod behind the door. The aluminum tube shoved up in the rafters that everybody assumed held a survey pole. 10 rods down, and I'd bet good money a lot of houses watching this have something off this list in them, waiting on somebody to look twice. So go out tonight, check the closet, the rafters, behind the door, up over the garage joists, pull every rod out of its tube, and read the shaft above the grip before anything goes in a truck. Then come back and tell me in the comments what you found and what the writing on it says. I answer every single one. I don't care how many there are. Next week we're getting into old duck and goose decoys, the wooden ones in barn lofts that folks use for doorstops. I'll see you then.